Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent McCory. This is Africa 54. We begin with a tragedy in Egypt tonight, where at least 15 people have been killed and 40 others injured in a train crash in the province of Beira. According to news agency MENA, two carriages from a passenger train are believed to have snapped off and collided with a cargo train. Reuters footage showed Beira's governor Nadia Abu at the crash site with a large crowd around her shouting, "We want a response." Now, Egypt's railway system has a poor safety record, mostly due to decades of badly maintained equipment and poor management. Egyptians have long complained that successful governments have failed to enforce basic railway safety standards. Now, a string of crashes have inflamed public anger over the antiquated transport network. Well, as Egypt comes to terms with that tragedy, there are mounting concerns on the economic front. 5 years after Ethiopia began construction of the Renaissance Dam on the River Nile, downstream neighbors Egypt and Sudan are worried about the impact on the river's water levels and potential harm to agriculture and other industries. As Edward Uranian reports, negotiations to reach an amicable solution continue, but no agreement is yet in sight.
Egypt was called the gift of the Nile by the ancient Greek historian Herodotus. Today, more than 2,000 years later, Egypt's water supply faces a critical threat. Ethiopia began building a dam in 2013 on one branch of the Nile. As it nears completion, Egypt fears the dam could reduce its share of Nile River water given to it under a 1929 international accord. During a visit to the Ethiopian capital Addis Ababa several years ago, Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi tried to appear conciliatory, but his worry was clear.
You will develop and grow with the dam. But beware that in Egypt, the people live only on the water that comes from this river.
Water experts say this concern is well placed.
99% of Egypt's water comes through the Nile, and that affects all the uses that Egypt might have for that water: agriculture, industry, drinking water. So therefore, Egypt is very concerned about anything that might change the amount of water that comes down the Nile or the timing of the releases of that water.
No one is quite sure how much the new dam will affect Egypt's agriculture or life in general. But the normal flow of the Nile was already altered by Egypt's own Aswan High Dam, completed in 1971 with the help of the former Soviet Union. Some warn water quality could deteriorate as levels of agricultural and industrial pollutants in a parched river increase.
If the amount of water flowing into Egypt from the Nile reduces, then the ability of the river to flush these pollutants into the sea is reduced.
Talks to reach an agreement continue. Egyptian Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry met with Ethiopian and Sudanese officials at an African Union summit in Addis Ababa in January. Journalist Hisham Qasim says that the main conflict hinges over whether Ethiopia will fill the reservoir behind the dam over a 12-year period or over 3, which would restrict Egypt's water usage in the meantime.
If no deal is reached over there, it could be catastrophic, because it could mean that a lot of the existing agricultural land in Egypt will be cut off, no water. The drought will have a serious impact on it.
War was threatened at one time by former President Hosni Mubarak, who warned he would destroy any dam Ethiopia built on the Nile. But Hisham Qasim says that is not a good option.
If there's a diplomatic failure and Egypt resorts to military force, it's going to be first the biggest diplomatic failure in the history of Egypt, and it's going to affect Egypt's ability to acquire arms.
In the meantime, President Sisi insists that there is no crisis and diplomats continue to talk. Edward Uranian for VOA News, Cairo.
Moving now to West Africa, 10 people have been killed in a part of northeastern Nigeria known for violent clashes between farmers and cattle herders. Military Commander Brigadier General Bello Mohammed confirmed on Wednesday that soldiers under his command killed 10 herdsmen and arrested 7 others. The attackers struck a village in the Gwamba region of Adamawa State. Nigeria's hinterland has been a flashpoint for such clashes, despite promises by President Muhammadu Buhari that he would improve security. Now, Muslim herders and Christian farmers are fighting over rights to grazing land and agriculture. Now, South Africa has taken a first step to speed up land reform. Its parliament has backed a motion to change the constitution and allow land expropriation without compensation. And the move comes a day after President Cyril Ramaphosa reshuffled his cabinet, adding new faces and removing some ministers allied to former President Jacob Zuma. Among key appointments was Nhlanhla Nene as finance minister. His sacking from the same post 2 years ago set off a ruling party revolt that eventually ousted former leader Jacob Zuma. Technocrat Pravin Gordhan, who was also fired by Zuma last March, was reappointed as Public Enterprises Minister. The ministry oversees around 300 state-owned firms, including loss-making South African Airways and cash-strapped power utility Eskom. In his reaction, official opposition leader Mmusi Maimane said the cabinet was still filled with compromised ministers. Now, for some perspectives on the developments in South Africa, I'm joined in studio by Paul Nantulia. He's a researcher for the National Defense University's Africa Center for Strategic Studies. Welcome back to Africa 54, Paul.
Thank you, Vincent. It's great to be back.
Yeah, so first, your reaction to the cabinet as it looks right now, that kind of reshuffling, what do you make of it?
Yes, I mean, you know, talking to people in South Africa, both close to the ANC and otherwise, it's quite clear that Ramaphosa had a number of things in mind. The first is he needs to balance the factions. The ANC is deeply divided between his supporters and supporters of the former president. And it's quite clear that he has an eye towards the elections of next year. He needs to keep those factions together. And that explains why a number of ministers who would ordinarily not have been appointed made it on his list. But he also scored some big wins, as you said in your skit, with Pravin Gordhan as head of enterprises, to restore stability in state-owned enterprises. Then he also has Lindiwe Sisulu as foreign minister, and that is something that's going to be received very well on the African continent. And then you have Treasury with Nhlanhla Nene in there, which will restore the stability and independence of the Treasury, as well as the fiscal, the fiscus. So I think it's basically, positives and negatives. Yeah. But I think we need to remember that this is primarily a caretaker administration. Cyril Ramaphosa is completing Jacob Zuma's term. Sure. And so you're going to see the real cabinet change come in next year, after he's gotten a mandate from the people through an election. Okay. So I still think that the jury is still out in terms of this tenuous balance between the reformers and those that would like to retain the status quo within the ANC. Is
there strategy in having Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma in the presidency?
Absolutely, because you see, ministries in the presidency, Batabile Dlamini, for instance, who's the president of the ANC Women's League, as well as Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, those positions report and are directed by the president, and so they serve at the pleasure of the president. They're not, they're very different from the normal cabinet ministries. Yeah. So there's some kind of tactical compromise in terms of keeping them close and keeping them in. And again, it's being done towards an eye to the 2019 elections, as well as balancing the different factions in the ANC. Yes.
Let's talk a little bit about land. The parliament has made a move. Of course, the opposition came forth with the bill, but it was supported by the ANC. Yes. Big vote in Parliament. Yes. Is that a big step this time around when you look back to the efforts?
Well, it's not new. Remember that the ANC made that policy in the Polokwane conference, which was 5 years ago. It made that policy of expropriating land without compensation. The policy wasn't implemented, and this is one of the reasons, actually, why Julius Malema left the ANC and formed the Economic Freedom Fighters. So it's sort of like an old policy position. However, it came up at the December conference, pushed by Jacob Zuma's allies. However, what is very interesting is that the parliamentary process is a little bit different from the process that is going to be pursued in cabinet. Because the cabinet process is based on 3 pillars. One is that the expropriation process must not undermine food security, must not undermine the economy, and must be based on broad consultation with business, civil society, as well as landowners. So there's a bit of a tension between the cabinet process as envisioned by the new administration, as well as the process that's ongoing in Parliament.
Now, there are people who have questioned, the process here and saying, first, is this land going to be fairly distributed to black South Africans, or are some people actually pushing for kind of a nationalization of this resource?
Well, I think it will be a more complex process than that, because what the cabinet is saying is certainly the transitional arrangements that are being done with the transition team. What they're basically saying is that this will be fallow land, unused land that they will take, and they will determine a price. So, in other words, it will not be taken. It will not be based on market forces. They will, the state will determine the price. However, the strategies that are envisioned in terms of how this process will unfold will still have to go through a public policy engagement process. And the South African government has a way in which policies, basically, you have a white paper, the policies go to the public, to the different sectors and so on, and then you have that input, and then the cabinet meets, and then it goes back to Parliament. So we still have a couple of months to go.
Now, we know that many South Africans, especially the poor South Africans, are actually based in the urban areas. They live in the urban areas. Does this address the real big issue, which is poverty in South Africa, and the big gap between the few wealthy people and these millions of poor South Africans? Yes,
absolutely, and that's a great question. And again, going back to the policy that is envisioned, within cabinet, it's being framed within the context of a larger policy to address poverty, to address the water shortages in South Africa, because South Africa is a water-stressed country, and water stress in South Africa is directly tied to land dispossession as well as the aridity of land. So it's a much more complicated package of measures, and definitely more complex than the process that the economic freedom fighters are pursuing in Parliament.
Indeed, as we go ahead with this, as we observe, we'll definitely try to break it down, and you definitely will come back and tell us a little more. Paul, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
Well, Paul Ntuli is a researcher for the National Defense University's Africa Center for Strategic Studies. Now, in 1993, terrorists detonated more than 500 kilograms of explosives beneath the World Trade Center in New York, killing 6 and injuring more than 1,000 others. In commemoration of the 25th anniversary of the attack, families have paid solemn tribute to their loved ones lost that February day, one that would forever change their lives. Ramon Taylor has more.
An intimate gathering to remember the 6 victims of the first ever attack on the World Trade Center in 1993, 8 years before terrorists would strike again on September 11, 2001. 4 of those killed were Port Authority employees. One of them was pregnant.
We were not ready for what visited us on that day. America was not ready for what visited them that day. And for that, I say I'm sorry. And we are sorry.
93 bombing was the powder keg. It was the start of America being vulnerable.
25 years ago, terrorists had hoped to bring down both towers after detonating explosives inside a rental van in a parking garage beneath the World Trade Center. That didn't happen, but for the victims' families, the occurrence is a reminder of their vulnerability.
It's amazing how every day we cross paths with people, and you may never see them again. And these are people that, who crossed paths on February 26, 1993, complete strangers, and they never came back again. And we're here. We're what's left.
And the rocket's red cloud. The commemoration is also a celebration of life, another day to pass down the stories and legacies of 6 individuals, along with the first responders who risked their lives that day. Lisa Knapp's husband lost his father in the 1993 bombing. She says it's important he teach their kids about their grandfather.
How much he was loved and all the funny stories, and try to make him alive for them. It's not easy, but it's what we have to do.
Ramon Taylor, VOA News, New York.
Well, I want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we covered. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our show live on Facebook, so check us out and share our show with your friends. Find me on Twitter at VOA Vince Macquarie. Now, coming up, rethinking the Africa-US, or rather US-Africa business relationship. Stay with us.
This is a country that I chose to become a citizen. I didn't have to become a citizen. I chose to become a citizen.
I feel like America gave me an opportunity to pursue my passion as an artist.
I really believe that clean eating is a way to a more successful life, or a happier life, if you want to put it that way.
One of the things that helps me wake up every morning is doing better, being better.
We grew up poor, and so I'm always focused on helping the working class be able to have a more comfortable lifestyle.
I'm passionate about doing justice every day. I oftentimes say that justice is a verb, not a noun. You know, I believe in action and moving the ball forward.
A high-level U.S. delegation from the Trump administration will head to Africa in March as the U.S. takes a fresh look at how it does business with the continent. Africa 54's Estegido Ewart attended a panel discussion in Washington that brought together business experts who spoke extensively on how to level the playing field for U.S. trade in Africa.
The trade discussion took place at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. U.S. Assistant Secretary of Commerce Erin Walsh says the Trump administration has a real appreciation for the economic and strategic importance of Africa.
Economic development across the continent is creating huge demand. Companies from China, India, Turkey, Japan, Europe, and the Middle East are actively pursuing commercial opportunities in Africa, and it is critical for the United States to pivot from an aid-focused to commercial engagement.
Thomas Hardy, the Director of Public Affairs and Congressional Relations at the U.S. Trade and Development Agency, says the agency is uniquely positioned to be a commercial driver to support U.S. industry's efforts and expand business opportunities across the continent.
It's important to look back at the President's national security strategy, where he specifically noted that China's investing in emerging markets to expand their influence and gain a competitive advantage against the United States. He further went on to say, specifically in Africa, that some Chinese practices are undermining Africa's long-term development by corrupting elites, dominating extractive industries, and locking countries into unsustainable debt.
I asked Florizel Lizer, President and CEO of the Corporate Council on Africa, what the U.S. focus in Africa should be, given China's aggressive business approach on the continent.
People act like China is the only country that's in Africa, and they're not. There's so many countries that are there because everyone recognizes it's what's the second fastest growing economy in the world. Their internet usage is growing 7 times faster than any other region in the world. Labor force is growing rapidly.
Walsh says the reality on the ground demands a strategic approach to share intelligence across all U.S. government agencies that have a piece of the economic engagement with Africa.
America will be competing in Africa. Anyone who has traveled to sub-Saharan Africa recently has seen the huge investment that the Chinese are making in support of their companies in the marketplace. For each person that we have on the ground, China has 40.
Dale Reniger is Executive Director, Global Government Affairs and Policy.
What we see is other governments focusing on specific projects, and this is greatly appealing to African leaders, and being able to say, here is a hospital that has been built, here is a railroad that has been built, here is a power plant that is up and running, is a lot more meaningful to them.
Burkina Faso's ambassador to the U.S., Seydou Kabore, highlighted what the African Development Bank calls the high fives that include a new vision of development for Africa.
The first one is to light up and empower Africa through
a new deal on energy for Africa to make energy affordable, reliable, and efficient. 2, feed Africa. Unlock the agricultural potential to improve the life of more than 70% of the population. Improve the quality of the life for the African people by enhancing education, technical skills, and health.
Most of Africa's rural areas do not have electricity, a key component for economic development. Edward Berry, vice president of the Private Investment Corporation, spoke of his visit to Togo, which just a few years ago had minimal electricity capacity.
A U.S. company called Contour Global came in. We loaned them money. They set up a power plant. It tripled the country's capacity to generate electricity. Now they've got a chance to power their economy. We get paid back with interest. So that's your kind of classic case of development finance.
Liza says a letter sent to the African Union by President Trump in January stated that U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson will be visiting a number of African countries in March, while U.S. Secretary of Commerce Wilbur Ross plans to take the President's Advisory Committee on Doing Business in Africa late June or early July. Esther Gidhui-Ewart, VOA News, Washington.
Well, the world's biggest mobile phone trade fair opened in Barcelona, Spain this week. The Mobile World Congress, or MWC, is one of the industry's best venues for networking, new business opportunities, and deal-making. Except for Apple, which traditionally stays away, big and small phone manufacturers and developers are displaying their wares as they battle a market valued at $478 billion in 2017. VOA's George Puttich has more.
Smartphones seem to have reached the point where not much can be improved.
I think we've pretty much hit a glass ceiling of innovation. If you look at the refresh cycles now that Samsung and Apple have in their products, it tends to be a 3-year rather than a 2-year cycle when you have a big upgrade.
So manufacturers turn to other smartphone features, such as the cameras. Samsung's new Galaxy S9 is basically the same as the previous model, except for the improved camera. It can make better pictures in low-light situations and can detect high-speed motion, automatically recording it in slow motion. For those who simply cannot afford the $800 phone, Google has developed a new operating system called Android Oreo Go. It's specifically designed for cheaper phones.
With Android Go apps, they take into account things like data. So on YouTube, it'll actually lower the amount of data that it takes to play a video because, well, data is expensive in developing countries.
The new operating system will be ideal for a range of affordable smartphones, such as Nokia's revamped slider phone 8110, launched in 1996.
We are fortunate enough to have with Nokia so many awesome, iconic design legends, and this year it's the 8110 reloaded, and we're bringing it back, but with 4G and Wi-Fi.
Accessories and gadgets ranging from see-through wall devices to robots also competed for customers' attention.
What we're trying to see is people beginning to try and differentiate with new accessories, new features on the phone, but allowing the user to customize their phone rather than customizing it by default.
And for those who just cannot imagine the world without selfies, there is also a machine that can print any image sent from a smartphone on top of the obligatory espresso crema. The MWC runs through March 1st. George Puttich, VOA News.
Drinking your own face. What is that now for a short break? Still to come on Africa 54, how the continent is wooing adventure travelers. We'll be right back.
In Nigeria, at least 10 people are dead and 7 others arrested in ongoing deadly clashes between herders and farmers in the Gwamba region. In Burkina Faso, the landmark trial over a failed 2015 coup came to a dramatic halt only hours after opening when defense lawyers staged a walkout. Algerian President Abdelaziz Bouteflika met with his Turkish counterpart Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who said Algeria was one of its most important trading partners in the region. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa swears in new cabinet members as part of his government reshuffle, placing reformers in key economic posts while retaining several scandal-tainted ministers.
Welcome back to Africa 54, and here's what's trending. A stage performer offers us a taste of the exotic to visitors at the Travel and Adventure Show in Los Angeles. It's one of the largest travel trade shows in the United States, and visitors to the event can get up to date with the latest trends, industry news, and expert advice. Top trends for 2018 include river cruising, so-called voluntourism, active adventure trips, cold weather destinations, and wellness holidays. Travelers with a luxury budget are continuing to look for those off the beaten track, one-of-a-kind experiences. South Africa remains one of the most popular destinations, while Botswana and Kenya are now trending. Well, next up, designers attempt to breathe new life into the flagging wearables market. Naguna is one company that believes the sector still has a future. It unveiled a new neckband for people with hearing loss. The device uses a microphone to detect sound, which it then converts into directional vibrations. Finnish firm Sense of Intelligence is betting on pets to be a hungrier market for wearables than humans, as it demonstrated its new device for dogs. The wearable jacket has 6 sensors to collect data, including heart rate, body temperature, and activity, which is then transferred to a mobile app. And finally, high temperatures and fevers can mean a stressful time for any parent. That's why South Korea-based Mobile Doctor created this connected baby fever monitor. The monitor patch measures a child's temperature. Parents can then check it by simply holding their smartphone close by. That information is then relayed to Mobile Doctor smartphone app named Fever Coach, which allows parents to keep an ongoing log of temperature readings. If the temperature goes too high, medical advice is displayed. If the temperature lowers, users are sent a message telling them not to worry. And that's what's trending today. Well, and that's our show for today. Now be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. For more news, tune in to VOA's evening radio show, Africa News Tonight at 1800 UTC, and in the mornings today, Break Africa between 0300 and 0600 UTC, Monday through Friday. Thanks a lot for watching from all of us in Washington. Have a good night.
Welcome to English in a Minute. Tango is a complex style of dance that developed in South America.
It takes two to tango.
Maybe Anna wants Jonathan to dance with her.
Did you see that baseball game last night?
I did. I couldn't believe how the pitcher yelled at the umpire.
The pitcher? The umpire is the one who made the terrible call.
Well, it